Hello everyone and welcome to the Acer Education webinar series. I'm Nidhi, Education Marketing Manager for Acer America, and I'll be your host for this session. The topic of our session today is Journey from a One-to-Many to a One-to-One Computing Initiative, Creating a Vision and Strategy. This opportunity to make some housekeeping announcements before we start. Note that you do not need to dial into a conference bridge for the audio. Please stop the volume on your computer speakers for audio as this session is being streamed online. We will host a question-answer session at the end of the presentation. However, ask questions at any time during the presentation using the chat window at the bottom right corner of your screen. All those questions will be collected and answered at the very end. Not least, this session is being recorded and will be available on our education website in about 3 business days if you want to share it with your colleagues. It's a great pleasure to introduce our guest speaker today, Dan Vigeant. He is the Director of Technology for Brockton Public Schools in Massachusetts. Dan has served many years in both the private sector as well as the public. Out as an independent contractor at the age of 17, he worked with the Massachusetts Department of Revenue's CAMA system to digitize all the property assessment records of his hometown of Mattapoisett as well as the neighboring town of Wareham. From there, he went to go work for corporate software in Canton, Massachusetts as one of the youngest senior technicians in the company's history. He has been an engineer for a leading technology company and an analyst for a world-renowned golf equipment apparel manufacturer. At age 30, he became one of the youngest K-12 urban IT directors in Massachusetts. He has spent the last 10 years in Brockton, pushing it to become a true leader in K-12 technology. I'm now going to hand it over to Dan.
Thank you. I have to say that was probably the best pronunciation of my last name, and maybe the worst pronunciation of my hometown.
I tried.
Good one for two. So hello, everyone. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on your time zone. We're going to look into Brockton's journey on its way to becoming a one-to-one district. While the journey is probably not completed, but we've learned a lot along the way thus far. And a story probably not unique in some ways, but in other ways, it's very personal. By sharing a little bit of Brockton's history, as it is a bit of a history icon in and of itself. You can see from the stats here, have roughly 100,000 people living here. Named Rocky Marciano Legacy by many boxing historians as one of the best heavyweight boxers of all time, arguably, I'm sure. Also the first in the world to build an electrical grid that Thomas Edison himself had a hand in creating. The grid also helped to illuminate the country's first electrically operated fire station. So there's a little bit of history of Brockton, and there's actually many other number ones the city has a claim to. But today I'm here to talk to you about my number one priority, which is school system and how it relates to technology. Quickly going down the list. Brockton Public Schools, just the school system itself is 2,000 staff members, the student population of 18,000. Our school gets some notable mentions. It's a large high school. We only have a single high school in the city. And that being said, we house currently 4,200 students. And it was an interesting note that I picked up off of Wikipedia while building this webinar. I'd never heard this one before, but apparently our high school is the size of an aircraft carrier with 13 acres of floor space. So now I get tired when I'm walking through the halls of that school. Quickly, we have 7 middle schools, 10 elementary schools, 4 alternative schools, 2 childhood centers, 1 adult ed center, all of which I'm responsible for the technology. The student population, there's definitely some interesting stats and highlights in the student population. It kind of gives some insight into the challenges we face as a growing city in the 21st century. First, our population is 18,000. When I started here in 2004, population was 15,000. So there's quite a positive growth trend. That's 3,000 students in just about 10 years. And to put that in perspective, the average size of a district in Massachusetts is about 2,500 students. So that growth alone beats out the size of most districts that surround Brockton. English language learners, that's a big bilingual, is a biggie in Brockton. We have a large immigration population, and 4,000 students just beginning to learn English. English is not their native language. Special needs as well. We ourselves on being able to accommodate a great amount of special needs, and 2,400 students take advantage of that program. Our income stats one kind of actually blew me away as well as most of the other stats in Brockton, but when I came on board to learn that 80% of our families do not have money to feed our kids lunch every day, that's a pretty wild stat. For me, technically, that means our e-reimbursement, which is a federal funded program for technology, is at an 85 to 90% reimbursement rate. So for me, what that means is when I buy technology basically to bridge the gap for band access, that was the original intent of E-rate. When I buy something, I actually only pay 10 cents on the dollar for it. So my internet service, my switches, my routers, my firewalls, things to get these students out into the 21st century, we get an 85 to 90% reimbursement for E-rate. That is a pretty tough one to swallow. We have 600, and that's officially, there are 600 students that are officially labeled as homeless. Student information system. That number was 500 a couple years ago, so unfortunately that's a growing trend as well. Language, because of the substantial immigration population coming into the city of Brockton, our school system is actually known to, if you walk the halls of our schools, you could probably hear up to 50 languages being spoken. Country of origin, this is not their parents or their grandparents, this is the student's country of origin. We have 33 countries listed of country of origin as first generation immigrants. To put a little highlight on that as well, anybody remembers the earthquake in Haiti in 2010? Within a month or two after the earthquake, we took in almost 200 Haitian students into our school system and kind of blended them in. So we have a breakdown of our how we support technology in Brockton. The use of several tech departments. When I first arrived here, it was pretty much an all hands on deck kind of operation. Basically whoever answered the phone took the call, you went out and tried to fix or do what you could do. With 20,000 users on our network, and me coming from the private sector, I kind of immediately saw the need to establish what I would call an enterprise level in the technology department. So within our time, we were able to actually kind of cobble together at least what layers would look like in a large enterprise out in the private sector. So we do have, a help desk. We do have network admins. We have technicians. Have somebody dedicated for the phone systems. So in that sense, we have layers, albeit with each layer we're still understaffed. As well as we have two other technology departments, and between the three of us, we make up the technology offering and support in Brockton. The other instructional technology department, which is responsible for integrating technology into the classroom. Data services and assessment, and they're pretty much managing the student information system and all the state reporting. So, in the beginning, which is around 2004 when I started in Brockton, I really only had one vision, and that was to eliminate the book bag. We talk about visions and goals, and honestly, in 2004, I was not coming from an instructional background. All I knew and could relate to is remember when I was in K through 12 and had to carry around this 20-pound book bag back and forth. So then in 2004, really one-to-one BYOD and PARC really weren't being talked about a lot. It might have been a whisper here and there. It didn't even really exist even as a concept, I don't think. All I knew, I just wanted to get rid of the book bag. I thought, we are in the 21st century, and this could be a student's book. It could be how they do their research. It could be how they take their tests. There's no reason why they need to be lugging around these things in their book bag. So that goal, there really was. It ended up real quick, given the amount of students we had and the size of the district and the buildings and wireless and everything else. It was like about a $9 million goal, and the reality was I was given about $1.5 million a year budget. So my number one goal kind of had to wait a little bit, and so began my journey, and it was introduced to about 60 department heads. They would make up of principals, directors, coordinators, and I worked with them individually on their visions and goals for the school system. We probably had about 3,000 computers at the time. A set it and forget it model, and it really didn't have a life cycle or any kind of proactive maintenance schedule as well. So given what was given when I came on board, and actually probably didn't realize the scope and size of Brockton and all its needs, what we basically do was kind of turn it into a meet with the department heads or all the stakeholders, to find out what your need, we're going to build it, you use it, and have fun. We're just going to go on to the next project and start building it. Initiatives were identified in each school. Devices were implemented basically on demand. So it was really a piecemeal kind of on-demand as-you-go system, and that went on for years. Over the years, looking back, adding it up, I probably averaged about 1,000 computers a year being deployed and decommissioning about 400. So, we had this weird paradox kind of. We actually were growing in numbers despite budget cuts. But the reality was we weren't decommissioning as many as we should. And at the end of 2013, we had 8,500 devices, so almost tripled the amount of equipment in the district. And we were kind of stuck at about a 7-year life cycle. So in that time, 2004 to 2013, so what did we accomplish? One of our big accomplishments was the ubiquitous Wi-Fi. This was a biggie right from early on. Prior to really looking at Wi-Fi implementation, we were literally like buying D-Links and Linksys, kind of stuff you get at Best Buy, and putting a few here and there, maybe in the library, the main office. This first real large-scale project, and we were able to put full coverage in every school. That was the goal, was coverage. I'll go back to that later on. We probably averaged about an access point per every 3 classrooms. And we also set up the BYOD guest network, which curriculum wasn't really promoting it as such. We knew it was a necessity, and just show how they were ready for the BYOD. When we turned on that week, I believe it was over 3,500 devices were typically using our network. While all of them, I can't guarantee, were educational, they were still in an educational system and weren't going to too many other places that were non-educational. At least it gave the real way for them that if teachers started to want to do the BYOD, they could. At least we eliminated the obstacles that we were kind of creating ourselves. We did create a life cycle. A long one. We averaged about 7 years, which is 2 years too long, in my opinion. Business manager really loved me for it, and we got along really well. We did have a 5-year life cycle for 1 year. That was kind of a notable mention. We got to a 5-year life cycle. We had some money unexpectedly put in technology, and we just bought a lot of devices, and we were able to commission a lot of the older devices. Along the way, things kind of were transformative in terms of where we are today. One is we started looking at the relationships we had with our vendors and starting seeing our vendors more than just somebody who's going to sell us equipment. We really want to forge relationships with vendors that kind of had the same agenda, the same goal. They want to see us succeed, not just buy stuff. So we started working with companies. Acer was definitely number one on the list. Oker's, our reseller, heavily influenced our success. Discovery and Microsoft really on the curriculum forms. But, you know, we really took a deep look. Honestly, that's one of the things, and I'll talk about that a little bit more later on. One of the things that actually kind of shocked me was how the vendors actually could help quite more than I think I was get to, and others think as well. Next one's probably the biggest one within Brockton internally. This was kind of my baby, and I said, you know what, we have to change things, but it's a systemic level. This isn't about buying one device over another. This isn't buying one software package over another. We really go about things at a whole different level and more of a district level. Our schools, our student populations are very diverse, as I explained, and the schools are given a level of autonomy, which isn't bad. Every school is different, absolutely. There needs to be somebody at the building level making decisions that can really relate to the student population of that school. But then there is a part that can be district-wide, and that's the piece I really wanted to start advocating for. So there's a couple different areas of advocacy that I wanted to focus on. One was more district-level decision-making regarding IT initiatives. The second was a budgetary thing. It was long-term commitments to technology, especially capital expenditures, versus year by year. I would kind of build this kind of hope, wish on the bucket list kind of thing. Hand it on my business manager. He'd beat it up a little bit. I'd go to either subcommittee or school committee. They'd beat it up a little bit, and I got something back, and I kind of had to make do with it. Very difficult to plan for more than a year in advance. And which then makes it difficult to plan your curriculum initiatives, especially the ones that involve technology. So I really start advocating for long-term, on look for more than a year expenditures. And that was a tough one to handle. Every year, unfortunately, for my 10 years here, just about every year we've had a budget crisis. Talking about, on average, probably somewhere between $3 and $5 million budget deficits every year, and you'd have to close those gaps some way. And, a lot of the times they're closing those gaps with operating expenses and capital expenditures, so they can save teachers and make sure that the classroom sizes are appropriate. And I understand and can appreciate that, but I still have to advocate for my end as well. I want to shift in roles and responsibilities for our traditional library managers, computer managers. That was basically the dynamic here. Was I had an IT department, and in a building there was one or two quasi-IT folks out there, but they really weren't under my purview. They were under the supervision of the principal, and the principal could have them do pretty much whatever they needed to, and sometimes they became a warm body that picked up these odd-end tasks. So my advocacy for that was, listen, we no longer have a few thousand devices. We're up to 8,000 or 9,000. We want another 5,000 or 6,000 in the next year or so. We need some help out in these buildings. My 8 techs and my 2 or 3 instructional folks, they're not going to be able to handle that kind of load. So, and I don't really foresee them adding a lot of people to my department. So I'm going to look kind of within what's going on in the buildings and what are the sources there that I can really kind of take advantage of that help us implement and integrate this technology into the curriculum. It was a small one, but it was kind of a fun one, I guess, to have. I actually had to advocate for social media access, specifically for my teachers. That so much isn't an argument anymore, but it is something that was kind of highlight, I guess. I remember it fondly. My instructional technology specialist and I trying to explain to the administration why things like Facebook and some other sites, incorporate social media, and it's not all bad. Other than that, we scraped together an instructional tech group in the tech services department. So I had one instructional technology specialist, and I took 2 technicians out of the field and gave the instructional tech specialist 2 technicians. We kind of cobbled together a little instructional technology department. I'll tell you, that specialist and her 2 assistants probably did 5 times what I think anybody, including myself, could have accomplished in those last 10 years, including starting their own technology conference. So one of the big issues we have in Brockton with professional development is paying for the teacher's time. It's not necessarily that we don't have a lot of professional development to offer. It's just anytime a teacher has time off, there's like 5 or 6 department heads vying for that time. So we start kind of thinking out of the box, like how are we going to reach these teachers? How are we going to get our how are we going to get our goals in place above and compete for these other tech departments? And one was to do our own annual tech conference. So that tech conference was one Saturday, once a year. We turned an entire school into a training facility. And we did, keynote, we did the breakout sessions. Every classroom had a breakout session. We got all our vendors involved, which were more than happy to participate, which goes back to vendor relationships like I mentioned earlier. That's one of the things, hey, we're putting this together, and some vendors flew out people free of charge to do these breakout sessions. Oakers, Discovery, Alamo, Acer, that's when it really counts, and that's when you really get to see how forging those relationships do make a difference. Four and 13, what did we learn? So early lesson is we have way too much tech and not enough PD. I just kind of went over that, and I have a slide just on professional development, so I'll sit on for that one for a minute. In a one-to-many environment, this is a recurring theme of mine anyway. My pet peeve has now become one-to-many. In a one-to-many environment, every new initiative becomes an IT project. What I mean by that is in a one-to-one, you're kind of in the mode of, originally, yeah, I deployed a ton of equipment. Now I'm in a mode of integrating it, supporting it, maintaining it. And it's a many environment where you're doing this on-demand thing. Your department's torn between, am I in implementation mode or am I in support and integration mode? And you're not fighting for those resources. That really kind of minimizes the impact on both sides, unfortunately. Also, keeping track of devices in a one-to-many, especially in Brockton, I can't speak for other districts. Keeping track of devices is tough. A big difference between giving a student a device and saying, this is your device all year, and you're going to use it in class every day, and if it ever goes missing or broken, I'm going to know about it right away. There's a big difference in that and handing a cart of 30 tablets to 5 or 6 teachers and go, here, you guys share amongst yourselves. Somebody take responsibility for it and let me know if anything happens. And unfortunately, sometimes, more often than not, if there are a couple of devices that are in need of help, the teacher might just put those back in the cart and roll the cart back onto the next classroom. So I can't wait to get to a full one-to-many. I one-to-one. One, supporting way too many apps. That's that across district consistency that I talked about. We have these schools that are bringing in these apps. And these apps, even, we have elementary schools, and we have actually 2 or 3 different elementary apps. And while they're all the same, they're probably doing similar things. So that's where, a curriculum leadership team, and I'll talk about that in a minute, really kind of comes into play now. Don't be afraid of digital textbooks. This is probably my most enjoyable experience or prize. When I was to get rid of the book bag, I knew that meant that, hey, if we're taking their books away, we're going to replace that with a device. And, that's a pretty intimidating proposal. We're not going to get to one-to-one anytime soon. At that point, I didn't really just neglect looking at digital textbooks or different projects that really seem to be catered towards a one-to-one versus a one-to-many. We had a need one time for a science curriculum in our elementary schools, and Discovery Ed actually just kind of came along. We used the streaming product for a while. Said, hey, we're creating a science tech book, elementary. And the moons were in alignment a little bit, and we put it together. And I'll tell you, fast forward 2 or 3 years, and we're not a one-to-one by any stretch, and we have 10,000 students currently right now enrolled through in their science and their social studies textbooks. Out of one-to-one, we were actually able to produce or deploy what we would consider a one-to-one environment. What we found out was, we did need some technology. One of the things that was a must was the director said, hey, I need projection in every room. Absolutely, that's a must. And fortunately, we had quite of that already, so there was just a few rooms I had to put in. And then we needed some stations, so maybe 6 or 7 tablets in every room, and we'll rotate them out. And it comes time for homework because we're not letting the students take the tablet home. or the device is home. When it comes to homework, we have some printouts, there's some options. So some of the vendors, like Discovery especially, they realize they might not be in a one-to-one where the students are taking these things home. So, there's accommodations for that. So I definitely recommend, if anybody's in a one-to-many like we are still, don't stay away from what looks like maybe a one-to-one project. Stories has become more like Swiss cheese, so that's something we're learning. This has been a real recent development, or at least something we put on the priority list, much so that we're with a lot of districts in Massachusetts to build our own privacy agreement. And part of that is sign up for Google or Microsoft or Pearson or Scholastic. You're clicking that agree checkbox, and then you have that 20 pages of that privacy agreement or whatever the agreement is. That's their agreement. That's not your agreement. That's their lawyers writing that. That's not yours. So a lot of us, including Boston and Cambridge and many other districts, we're saying, hey, we need a privacy agreement that we make them sign off on. So that thing last probably 6 months or so. We're trying to give that some legs, a bit of a grassroots movement with hopefully the state hopping on board or sponsoring it at some point. But the district's privacy agreement, you don't always have to follow theirs. $1 million wireless network is not so awesome. I think we probably learned that in Park. But so we put together probably 6 years ago now what we considered to be a dream wireless system. It was Cisco. It was the best access money could buy at the time. You literally could not buy a better device. And after a short time, more because of density and not necessarily because of coverage, but in time, we found out that this system was not going to last 10 years like we had hoped. Spreading around tech for the sake of equity, really defeating. This is a controversial one, and this is really, I get the idea of equity and spreading around the equity and the haves and the have-nots. As a purely technological and selfish standpoint, I love one-to-ones because they just give you so much more. But I also do get the whole equity thing and how we have school committee counselors and everything vying for their particular schools and ensure that there are no have and have-nots. But I'll throw it out there because whether you agree with it or not, I can't think you can disagree that it's not a fair observation. Something that kind of is a thorn in my side fairly often, and I'll get to that in a second. How grew each year amongst budget cuts. I talked about that, how we had budget cuts, but somehow we were adding devices, and basically we were sacrificing the life cycle of those devices. Amount of staff that support 3,000 devices gets a little stressed around the 8,000 mark. The reality is my department probably getting a little stressed around the 5,000 mark. I had more staff for about 7 years in a row, and while we're laying off teachers, it's very difficult to get approval for technology staff. So we kind of where we were, not staff I showed you in that first couple of slides. That's what we're now. But basically the first slide, minus a few technicians and a little bit of money for outsourcing network support. And the last one, 7 years, is a long time for any device. My business manager loves me because he gets to amortize a device that costs whatever, $500 over 7 years. It's really not practical, especially nowadays with what we're trying to do with these devices. 7 years is a long time. So I didn't. So while I was building this webinar, I came across an E-rate. I do a lot with E-rate, so I came across an E-rate blog or LinkedIn message or whatever from Anthony Claro. And this has been my philosophy since day one. And it probably was born out of the fact that I wasn't an instructional person. So, it was funny when they started coming at me with, like, instructional technology this and instructional technology that. And they wanted to make me director of instructional technology. I said, no, I come from the private side. I said, honestly, friends at Cookout would laugh at me a little bit because with that title list, per se, we didn't call ourselves director of golf ball technology. We were just the technology department. So there was born this philosophy that actually really worked well of you're an instructional person, you tell me what you need, I'm the technology person, I'll help you find it. And I think that's kind of where it gets to, and I know some districts, depending on size, the technical director also has to be the instructional technology person as well. Last sentence to me anyway strikes a chord. It's basically saying, you know, today with the proliferation of technology, the plans need to actually, the technology plans need to closely resemble instructional and curriculum planning, with technology taking a back seat and providing a more supportive role. And I think that rang true to me 10 years ago, and honestly, I think it rings true today. I think some are combined, and you do have that one person who is the tech director plus the instructional curriculum leadership person as well, and you know, it's what it is. But in a larger environment, when you have the layers, philosophy really works well. In 2014, and the moons are in alignment, and I was going to put a bunch of moons in alignment here, but with that blood supermoon thing the day, I said, you know what, it's kind of relevant. I'm going to throw that in there instead. So, all right, there's our supermoon, which was kind of cool. I got a chance to see that night. So when everybody said, look at all the red hue, I was a little stuck with slightly grayish red, I think, but nonetheless, it was pretty impressive. So anyway, in 2014, a lot of things came together, me and for Brockton and for technology in Brockton, which meant it came together for me. We did get a new executive level curriculum leadership team, which I'll talk about in a second. A park showed at our doorstep. I got my first one-to-one pilot school, which I didn't know if that was ever going to happen. I did it. There was a school in high needs, and they were given some special consideration, other things, as well as technology, and I was able to get a one-to-one in that school. Changes in roles of those school-based personnel that I mentioned earlier are starting to take shape, which is great because that's a tough one, changing anybody's role. IT money seen as a critical line item in the budget. So, Brockton, I've been very fortunate. I mean, I'm saying this not just because possibly one of the bosses is listening in on this, but I'm very fortunate. I've never had anything but the utmost support and confidence from the superintendent, the school committee, the business manager, you name it. People in the decision-making ranks, you know, they really actually saw technology as critical. But there's a slight distinction between an untouchable line item and an important line item. And in 2014, that corner has been turned, and we're looking at technology line items as uber critical because it is integrated in just about every classroom at this point. It's something that you can't just let fall apart because you're really basically saying you're going to let the teacher's curriculum and tools they use fall apart. So that was the biggie. A bit. It's always been an important line item, but now it's being as critical. Versus annual purchases, that's huge. I don't know how many districts. I mean, my business manager and I have been talking about leasing for years and years. I honestly, when I first got on board 10 years ago, I said, "Wow, we're going to have to lease." I mean, it's not like we're not going to have computers one year. And obviously, I was wrong, but you know, this has been a conversation going on forever, and a lot of districts have already switched over to leasing, and those who haven't, I would definitely encourage a second look at that. A couple of things. Money-wise, I don't really see a lease being any kind of financial incentive to do a lease. It's not necessarily cheaper. What it does do is it gives you a predictable revenue stream, and it kind of ties the business manager's hands a little bit, so he can't, when you say, hey, the budget's really having a problem with the budget this year, you're not going to buy any computers. So it gives you that dependability, that predictability put back into your budget, and now you can actually start planning multi-year implementations. And we did increase the IT department staff. So 8 years later, we got some more staff. We added a couple more technicians, and a couple senior techs, and I was able to add some money into the line items of outsourced network support. So we started 2 network admins, but we'll just continue to outsource the rest of the support we need for the network. Tons of changes. So this is that new executive curriculum leadership team. So the CL curriculum leadership team. So that CLT I was talking about, and this is a biggie. This this was a tough nut to crack for Brockton. I saw a lot of districts do this early years ago, where basically their superintendents and deputies and their curriculum coordinators and directors were going to say, hey, technology isn't something that some department down the hall is taking care of. Technology is influencing our instruction at such a level that it's got to be considered instruction. Right when that happens, all of a sudden a whole slew of good things start happening. But it finally did happen in Brockton, and we do have a team of coordinators that touch just all grade levels and all subject matters, and quickly. Their big thing is to really evaluate what is technology doing in Brockton. What do we need to make sure that we're getting the best bang for our buck, and what do we do to make sure we don't have redundancies or inefficiencies out there? So, we're really close. I work really close together with them, and it's a long road. It's a big ship, and there's a lot of low-lying fruit, but it's such a good direction and changed and trend to be changed into. So we're a park state. I don't know for how much longer. I think we're voting on it in November, whether we're going to remain a park state. Anyway, park was kind of cool for me. It was very, very frightening for my curriculum teams. For me, it meant that I wasn't going to have to fight to buy devices because park's pretty much demanding you have a lot of devices on hand. We were in need of some major device availability. The reality was, even with 8,500 computers, on state reports, we actually showed we were just about a 2-to-1 district. We had students per every computer. That was really good for us. The reality was those computers were still in computer labs. There were 5 or 6 in the back of every classroom. None of them were really geared for a one-to-one or classroom test-taking environment. You weren't going to take 5 kids at a time in your classroom taking a high-stakes test. It was going to take you all day, and how do you manage that without interrupting the students? So what the district as a whole really learned really quickly was 8,500 devices wasn't a whole heck of a lot of devices for this district. In fact, no school had the capacity to take part. If they were going to take it digitally or electronically, no school had the capacity to take it in any form. Year one, we purchased and deployed 400. We actually did a little bit more for the park. For park's sake of conversation, we deployed 400 Acer W510 2-in-1 devices, which is basically a tablet with a keyboard, is the best I can describe as a Windows device. And we purchased this, and what I had in mind was basically, I didn't know if we were going Google, I didn't know if we were going Microsoft. I didn't know we really hadn't gotten into the tablet world all that much. I didn't know if touchscreen was important or if it wasn't. There was different factors, and I said, you know what? I'm just going to get the best of all worlds until we really figure this out, because we need them for park. That's a given. But what I want is once park is over, we're stuck with a lot of devices that I go, all right, it was really good for park, but not necessarily for anything else we were doing. That I did not want to happen. So I pretty much did like the best of all worlds, got the device, and it worked really well. Year we switched over. 2 things we learned in year 2. One is 10 inches was the screen size on a Windows tablet. And we went with the 11.6, and we now have adopted basically 11.6/12 inches or above. We probably won't ever buy anything smaller than that. And in year 2, we deployed 600 of the Switch 11s, everybody loved, 3 more schools. So now 5 schools enrolled in park. We have 1,000 or so tablets out there doing its thing. The year, which is this year, like I mentioned, Massachusetts is actually still determining whether to stay with park or not. Regardless if it does, I mean, they look at MCAS. We're pretty with the MCAS, and I'm sure they'll be looking to make that electronic in the near future. So, I mean, that tidal wave of demand is never going to stop, whether it's digital curriculum, assessment, or high-stakes testing. Overall park experience wasn't great. It was extremely beneficial. One-to-many is a tough model for our district, which I kind of already knew, but it really emphasized the point. It showed we need better wireless. And also, this was an interesting one, touchscreen isn't always our friend. What I mean by that is year one, these were all touchscreen devices. Year two, they were all touchscreen devices, but I had the request from all 5 schools, can we disable touchscreen for the test? Because the kids were messing around or playing around with the Zoom capabilities, and say, is it a user problem? Is it a technology problem? Is it a park problem? The reality was the park app really kind of freaked out about it, and it would kick kids off thinking they were trying to get out of the program, which was like, oh, they're cheating or something. Let's kick them out of the program. Well, that's happening more often than we would like, so we disabled touchscreens. So there were non-touchscreen devices for the park. That worked out really well. It was nice to actually have the option of turning them back on after the park. That's it. We got our first one-to-one in 2014. Like I mentioned, equity was always kind of the deciding factor about certain things, but this school was given special consideration. So I got my one-to-one. We deployed another set of the Acer 2-in-1 device. It was a blend of Acer 11s, Switch 11s, and W510s. And that was only because they were kind of, when we did this, it kind of crossed both park years. And so they got kind of a blend of both. We do grades 3 through 5, 280 students. And I just sent an email the other day. I said, hey, get some kind of quote for this webinar. Let me know what you're thinking about the one-to-one. And you get the normal, like, I mean, you can go online and do case studies of one-to-one all day long. Not very many of them are going to say negative things about it. But what I got a kick out of was actually, and this was without me asking, the last sentence or two, he actually made a comment that it's nice the kids are learning responsibility and they're making sure their device is plugged in, their battery is charged, instilling responsibility as a character trait. And I said, that's fantastic. That's one of my main problems with one-to-many is the ownership of these devices and who's taking care of, who's making sure they are charged. So it's kind of funny that this teacher made that observation one of the highlights, which is going to make my life a lot easier. To present. So recap. My first lease purchase. That's a feeling, and working closely with the curriculum leadership team to plan technology initiatives, which are huge. And honestly, these are going to be the 2 biggest ones we've done. Rolling out 6,000 to 7,000 devices. I tend to roll about maybe 1,000 to 1,500 a year with no problem. But 6,000 to 7,000, that's going to be fun. I mean that, and I mean that sincerely. That we'll have a blast with that. We're really heavily on Acer and Okers help us with those deployments, and that's I look forward to the day I can just call up and say 10 cards here, 12 cards there, 5 cards there. According to MS365, that's huge for us. I mean, there's probably a difference between migrating a couple hundred users and migrating 20,000. So that's going to be a tough one. But like I said, we're going to work closely with the curriculum leadership team. A lot of that involves development more than anything. I mean, honestly, Microsoft 365 is a check mark for my network guys. I think we have all 20,000 users enabled already. The users just don't know it. The curriculum leadership team thinks we support way too many apps. I mean that. Yeah, that was a nice one for them to make that observation, because I can't wait to. I'll show you. I have a partial list of the apps we have to support in another slide coming up. Underlying roles within the schools. 9 days for my new E-rate award letter. So that not so awesome wireless system is going to get replaced with the new awesome wireless system. That'll hopefully last more than 5 years. Who knows though? But it'll be wireless in all the schools. One of the big differences is the AC wireless, obviously, the AC protocol, and excuse me, and the fact that we're going to put an access point in every classroom. So when we were doing wireless, we were putting an access point 1 in every 3 classrooms. Really just going for signal strength, but now you're going for device density. So every classroom is going to have at least 30 devices. Access points, regardless of which manufacturer you go with, they tend to start balking around the 30 mark. So you're really looking at minimal, an access point in every classroom. And then device selection. Can one size fit all, or should I say, can one size still fit all? That's what I'm going for. Selection and which cola do you prefer? I love the cola analogy, so I'll give you a real brief history of my cola analogy. I've been using it, honestly, for like 15 years. And everything. It's incredible. It started out when I was a field engineer. I was doing a lot of antivirus installs. And I would go to one customer who would rip out McAfee and beat up Norton antivirus. Those were the two back then. This was probably going back 15 years. It was McAfee and Norton. They were like, collapsing. So that became the cola analogy. But then I go to the next the next customer, and they rave about Norton and say how awful McAfee was. And then as an engineer, you start listening to this over and over and over again, year after year, and you're like, I support both products. I think they're both pretty decent. And you start realizing, okay, this is like the Pepsi challenge. This is a cola. Everybody's drinking cola. We can agree on that cola is good. You like Pepsi, you like Coke, whatever, I get it. You might never see each other's side. Might switch over every once in a while, who knows, but I get it. So born was a cola analogy. So Microsoft 365 and Google Apps for Education, I put it surely in the cola analogy spectrum. I think they're both great products, and at this point, this has actually been a shift for me. I'm starting to think, why use? And I'm not going to belabor either product, the pros and cons, because you can find countless information on that. But I'll just tell you my 4 or 5 things. One, I like both products. I mean, they do. They've worked very well for districts that I visited, and they were Google or Microsoft or vice versa. 2, I'm a former Microsoft engineer, so if any complaint I would agree with probably with Microsoft is it's a little more complex than a Google environment. But that complexity, I was born in that complexity. Very comfortable at night, sleeping at night when it comes down to security and privacy and rights and deployments and group policy and Active Directory. And I have a Microsoft engineer on staff too. So once you kind of build it, you kind of build this like fort, you will. But once it's built, it really kind of stands up to a lot of tests. So that's background, and that's why I prefer Microsoft over Google or what. But the reality is, I like both products. I mean, I don't shy away from Microsoft's complexity. Number 3, this is the big one. This is wild. I've been fun watching this play out. How many districts have claimed to be a Google Microsoft district only for you to visit them, because I'm interested in seeing both, and find using both in fashion of it, even though formally they've claimed or it's labeled somewhere that their district is a quote-unquote Google district or a Microsoft district. And I know directors usually half the time personally, I'll go over there and I'll be like, well, how did you get rid of Microsoft Office anyway? And they're like, well, we really didn't get rid of Microsoft Office. Or, you really like Gmail over Exchange? You're like, no, we're still on Exchange, but we like Google Apps. So we're on the Google Apps, we're using Exchange for email. And it's amazing how many districts actually fall in that category. I don't know what to really attribute that to, but maybe not such a bad idea. And then number 4, whether you're Google or Microsoft or ClassLink or Gluxer or whatever the new name's going to be in the next year or 2 or 3, who knows what's around the corner? I mean, I'm trying to get 5 years out of my devices. Who knows what's around the corner in the next 2 to 3 years? I just want to be able to adapt to that. That's my main concern and goal, not necessarily what's cool and hot today. I want to make sure what I'm buying and investing millions of dollars in is going to be around for tomorrow. That's always a tough argument, actually. Back in the day means like 3 years ago, maybe. It's a tough argument because there was a big cost difference, I think, and there was some compatibility issues between Microsoft and Google and iOS and everything. But those two things have become less of an argument. The tablets and devices and everything have kind of found this little happy medium of the $200 to $300 range or whatever. Compatibility issues for standard are less and less. So at this point, maybe the world is our oyster. And then all that, a full disclaimer is that we're standardizing officially. We will be a Microsoft district, but I can definitely tell you that Google will already be live and well. We've standardized on Microsoft. And I think the distinction maybe there is we're going to implement support, promote Microsoft, but we're not shut off access to GAF. Selection. So this to me is pretty cut and dry. I just put a bunch, every time about any kind of hardware to a certain extent, and I need to know functionally, aesthetically. My job to me is like, perform, is it going to be compatible, is it going to last? But when you start talking about functional and aesthetical, I'm going to use this for 5 years, somebody else is. So I get a bunch of people in the room. The curriculum leadership team has made that a little easier for me over the years, or over the last year. But I have a bunch of people in the room and hand them a bunch of devices, and let debates begin. And I think healthy debates. Some of them, I think they're goofy, but regardless, I listen to them and make sure I'm not missing something. First and foremost, strong partnership with your manufacturer and reseller. I truly believe that. I'm saying it because one of the manufacturers is hosting this webinar. I truly believe that it's made a difference in how our success, if we implement, especially with large implementations, that relationship with the manufacturer and the reseller does definitely make a big difference. So that, in no particular order, screen size, that seems to be debatable. Then we're not going to go anything less than 12 inches, and by 12, I mean 11.6, I guess. And less than that, we were getting some complaints on. Battery life, this is going to be an interesting one. I'm trying to get something to last 5 years, whether it be an extended life battery or something in the warranty that says, hey, after the battery's capacity goes down below 80%, it gets covered under warranty, and I get a new battery. So somewhere along the lines, I got to make a stipulation in there to make sure that we have the correct battery life. That's 5 years. Because if we all have laptops of 10 years ago, that life of quote-unquote 6 hours was 5 hours the next year and 2 hours the next year, and in its third year life, you were basically plugging that in. Touchscreen seems to be this debatable district, and I put in parentheses last minute, not anymore, because the last meeting I had, they said, you know what, as long as we can turn on and off the touch screen when we want, we like touch screens. So we're going to have touch screens in our next rollout. The keyboard, once again, that seems to be a debatable topic. We're looking at this point, detachable keyboards for the staff, because they'd like to use them as slates and tablets, and not for the students because they don't want anything to get lost or stolen or damaged, and anything detachable and optional seems to kind of put in that category of easily lost or broken. It's friendly. It's not just for park, actually, surprisingly, but because of the student population and the diversity of it, the teachers and curriculum leaders have identified that traditional mice over a touchpad is a lot more easier to use for some of our students, and that's the job. That's the position we're in, is to make sure that our kids are learning. So if they need mice, we'll get them mice. Fortunately, mice cost like $1 now. Performance of cost is kind of where I get in. I really don't like taking cheapest thing out there. You really have to justify going above and beyond the cost. But the reality is, you get 5 years out of a device instead of 3, and you can amortize it over 5 years. Cost-wise, actually, it might be cheaper to buy the better device. If you're going to buy 5,000 devices, slow as molasses, and 3,000 of them are going to get tossed in the closet within the first 2 years, well, I really think that you might want to go on with some higher performing devices that we're going to get used for 5. And those things have played out. I mean, I've seen them firsthand. I've seen them secondhand. Real considerations. Number 8, wireless. I know this probably isn't a big deal so much these days, but a year or so ago, make sure you're AC compatible. Make sure you're at least a 2x2 or a 3x3. Stay away from the 1x1 stuff. And spares. So you're dealing with this kind of quantity. I think spares become more and more important. The appropriate amount of spares. So, 2 or 3 spares on hand really isn't going to cut it when you're dealing with 5,000 or 6,000 devices in a rollout. Professional development. So professional development is interesting because it's the lack of professional development offerings that we deal with. It's actually the lack of time that we have with the teachers. Like I said earlier, when a teacher has some availability, there's like 4 other directors or department heads vying for that time. So we've had to become creative. It's kind of the kitchen sink methodology, is that we're just going to throw everything at it that we can. So in that regard, we have in-house trainers. Is we have those 2 instructional specialists, and we have Promethean, we have Elmo, we have Promethean, we have that we deploy out there, Bright Links. And for this, these 2 in-house trainers, they'll go in, they'll make sure the teacher knows how to turn it on. Literally, turn on, set up, and at least start into the curriculum. It's called an entry-level development opportunity that we have and we can provide. After that, it gets a little more intricate with their subject matter and their grade level. So we have webinars. Vendor-led professional development has become a huge thing in the last few years. When we buy a package, we tend to focus on what professional development offerings do you have and how can we build it into the price of that package. And more times than not, most of the major software packages we have now come with multiple days a year of they'll fly in, they'll trainers, and once they're doing that kind of commitment, then it seems like the department heads have a little better time arranging time for the teachers to go to sessions. Collaboration with area colleges and universities, we collaborate with 3 or 4 at least. In our area, they range from, they put on classes, and these are college-level classes, all around the technology that we use in Brockton, actually. They'll come in, find out what we're using, and build classes around it. They'll all have student interns come here into several of our schools and help with the teachers integrate technology into the curriculum. Video conferencing, we have a video conferencing system, so 10 elementary schools, maybe there's an elementary teacher that really wants to show off their stuff, but because it's across town or whatnot, it's tough to get 20 people in a room together. We have conferencing systems that each school, you can go to your area that has a video conference system, and you can sit and you can partake in a Brockton video conference, or you can do distance learning. We do virtual field trips, all sorts of stuff, and it just complements the whole professional development offerings. The annual technology conference that I mentioned, that I think is one of our crowning achievements of providing professional development here in Brockton. All right, those were literally software packages, like I said earlier, way too many apps. This is what I just came up with off the top of my head in 10 minutes, and I probably could have filled a whole nother column. So those are some of the things we support now. Hopefully this will shrink a little bit in the next year or so. Time to commit. So this was huge, and this is kind of, this is that large-scale, district-wide, systemic, philosophical epiphany to have and say, is technology going to be like an important but optional thing in our district, or is it going to be critical? And in Brockton in 2014, it was decided that it's going to be critical. So we have a couple major things coming out. We're going to be rolling out 6,000 or 7,000 devices. We're going to be installing a $2 million wireless system. Looking into leasing versus year purchasing. So even though Brockton's been very supportive of technology, it's really going to hit its stride in the next year or so with my commitment. And that commitment wasn't me. I was always committed to technology in Brockton. That was my job. Commitment really comes from the top, and that's going to make the biggest difference. So that's it. So Brockton's story. I hope you've enjoyed it. And there's Q&A.
If you have any questions, please feel free to type them in. I haven't seen any questions right now, Dan. One thing that I have heard, I had received, and it was just, I'm to answer it, it's about the recording. So the webinar archive will be available on our website in about 3 business days. As you can see, I have the link for it up on the slide here. In addition to that, there is a Twitter handle for Acer Education and also for Dan himself, and you can reach out to us also if you have any further questions. One question that just came up, Dan, are you currently 1A access in every classroom?
The new wireless that we're putting in this year is going to be 1 access point in every classroom. Which is, I mean, really, I think, in my opinion anyway, 1 access point in every classroom is bare minimum at this point. Because if you look, if you're going to start doing one, you're probably looking at 20 to 30 devices right there. Then if they have their own BYOD, you're going to get up that 30 mark pretty quick, and you're going to be in a tough spot. I actually heard rumors that district or 2 were actually considering 2 access points in a classroom. That gets into a whole other conversation about oversaturation of access point and signals frequencies. But 1 access point in the classroom, I think, is bare minimum these days.
And
you're welcome.
I think with this, come to the end of our presentation today. Thank you, everybody, for joining, and thank you again, Dan, for sharing your experiences with us.
You're welcome. Glad I could.
And once again, this recording will be available on our education website in about 3 business days. Everybody.
Okay.